No demonstration at all in the streets.
Here's why this matters to us.
After months on the run, Muammar Gaddafi is dead.
In 2011, revolution swept across Libya. For more than 4 decades, the country had been ruled by Muammar Gaddafi, a leader who combined revolutionary rhetoric with authoritarian control. When protests erupted across the Arab world during the Arab Spring, Libya quickly became one of the most dramatic battlegrounds of the movement. What began as demonstrations demanding reform soon escalated into a civil war that would topple one of Africa's longest-serving rulers. Yet, the fall of Gaddafi did not bring the stability many Libyans had hoped for. Instead, the revolution opened a new and uncertain chapter in Libya's history. To understand how Libya reached that moment, it is important to begin with the country itself. Libya lies at the edge of human habitation. More than 90% of its territory is desert, part of the vast Sahara that stretches across North Africa. Because of this harsh geography, most of Libya's population historically lived in 2 narrow coastal regions along the Mediterranean Sea. Outside major cities, tribal and regional identities have long shaped social and political life. Loyalty to family, tribe, and region often played a stronger role than allegiance to central authority. Modern Libya emerged as an independent state in 1951 after decades of Italian colonial rule. At the time, the country was one of the poorest nations in the world. But everything changed a few years later. Beneath Libya's desert sands lay one of the largest oil reserves on the planet. As oil production expanded during the 1950s and 1960s, the country suddenly became wealthy. The new wealth transformed Libya's economy, but it also created tension. Many Libyans believed the benefits of oil were not being distributed fairly. The ruling monarchy led by King Idris was often accused of favoring certain tribes and regions. Discontent grew within the military. In September 1969, a group of young officers led by Muammar Gaddafi launched a coup while the king was abroad. The monarchy collapsed almost instantly. Gaddafi declared the creation of the Libyan Arab Republic and promised sweeping reforms. During the early years of his rule, Libya underwent dramatic changes. Oil production was nationalized, foreign businesses were expelled, and the state assumed control of large sectors of the economy. Gaddafi also developed his own political philosophy, combining elements of socialism, Arab nationalism, and what he called Jamahiriya, or rule by the masses. In theory, Jamahiriya was meant to create a system of direct democracy where ordinary citizens govern themselves through popular committees. In practice, real power remained firmly in Gaddafi's hands. Political parties were banned, dissent was suppressed, and critics often faced imprisonment or death. While Gaddafi promoted himself as a revolutionary leader, his role depended heavily on loyalty from specific tribes and security forces personally tied to him. Libya's relationship with the international community was also tense. During the 1970s and 1980s, the Gaddafi government was accused of supporting militant groups and sponsoring attacks abroad. Several Western governments labeled Libya a state sponsor of terrorism. Tensions reached a peak in 1986 when the United States launched airstrikes against Libyan targets in response to attacks linked to Libyan intelligence. Over time, however, Gaddafi sought to repair Libya's international reputation. By the early 2000s, Libya began improving relations with Western countries. Sanctions were lifted, and diplomatic ties were gradually restored. Despite these changes, problems inside Libya continued to grow. On paper, Libya appeared relatively prosperous compared with many neighboring countries. Before the 2011 uprising, the country's GDP per capita exceeded $16,000. Life expectancy had increased significantly and literacy rates were among the highest in North Africa. But these statistics concealed deeper issues. Libya's economy relied almost entirely on oil. Other sectors remained underdeveloped and many citizens depended on government jobs that paid very little. Youth unemployment was particularly high, hovering around 30%. At the same time, the country faced a severe housing shortage and rising frustration among younger generations. By the end of the 2000s, dissatisfaction was widespread. Then, in late 2010, protests erupted in Tunisia, sparking a wave of uprisings known as the Arab Spring. Across the Middle East and North Africa, people took to the streets demanding political change. Libya was no exception. In early 2011, demonstrations began in the eastern region of Cyrenaica, particularly in the city of Benghazi. Protesters demanded reforms and an end to corruption. The situation escalated quickly. On February 15, 2011, authorities arrested a human rights lawyer in Benghazi, triggering large demonstrations. Within days, security forces opened fire on protesters. More than 200 civilians were reportedly killed, transforming the protest into a nationwide uprising. As violence intensified, parts of the Libyan military began defecting to the opposition. Rebels seized weapon depots and organized themselves into armed groups. By the end of February, much of eastern Libya had fallen under rebel control. Opposition leaders established a new political body known as the National Transitional Council, or NTC, based in Benghazi. Gaddafi, however, refused to step down. His loyal forces launched a major counter-offensive, retaking several cities and pushing eastward towards Benghazi. By March 2011, the rebels were on the brink of defeat. At that moment, the conflict took an international turn. The National Transitional Council appealed to the international community for help, asking for the creation of a no-fly zone to prevent Libyan government forces from attacking civilians. On March 17, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution authorizing member states to take all necessary measures to protect civilians.
The United States has worked with our international partners to mobilize a broad coalition, secure an international mandate to protect civilians, stop an advancing army, prevent a massacre, and establish a no-fly zone with our allies and partners. 2
days later, a NATO-led coalition began air operations over Libya. Coalition aircraft targeted Libyan air defenses, armored vehicles, and military bases. The strikes halted Gaddafi's advance towards Benghazi and gave the rebels a chance to regroup. But the UN mandate did not allow foreign ground troops to fight directly in Libya. If Gaddafi were to be removed, Libyans themselves would have to carry out the fight. Over the following months, rebel forces gradually pushed westward along the coast. One of the fiercest battles occurred in the city of Misrata, where rebels endured a prolonged siege by government troops. The city became a symbol of resistance as defenders held out despite constant shelling and heavy casualties. Meanwhile, rebel fighters in the Nafusa mountains advanced towards the capital. By the summer of 2011, Gaddafi's position was weakening. In August, rebel forces launched a major assault on Tripoli. The battle was surprisingly brief. Some government units surrendered or defected, and the capital fell within days. Gaddafi himself managed to escape. For several weeks, he remained in hiding as loyalist forces regrouped in the coastal city of Sirte, his hometown. Rebel forces surrounded the city and launched a final offensive. On October 20, 2011, Gaddafi attempted to flee Sirte in a convoy. His vehicles were struck during the fighting, and he was captured by rebel fighters. Later that day, he was killed under circumstances that remain debated. After more than 40 years in power, Gaddafi's rule had come to an end. In July 2012, Libya held its first democratic elections in decades. Voters across the country participated enthusiastically, hoping the revolution would bring stability and prosperity. For a brief moment, it seemed that Libya might be entering a new era, but the challenges ahead were enormous. Under Gaddafi, political institutions had been weakened, and many experienced leaders had been eliminated or driven into exile. Armed militias that had fought during the revolution remained active, often loyal to local leaders rather than the central government. Political divisions soon resurfaced. In September 2012, an attack on the US diplomatic compound in Benghazi revealed how fragile Libya's new security environment had become. Over the following years, rival political factions and militias struggled for power. By 2014, Libya had once again descended into civil war. Today, the legacy of the 2011 revolution remains deeply debated. For some Libyans, it represents a moment of courage when citizens stood up against decades of authoritarian rule. For others, it marks the beginning of instability that continues to affect the country today. Libya's revolution reminds us that overthrowing a dictator can only be the first step. Building a stable and united nation afterward can be far more difficult. And in Libya's case, the struggle to shape the future is still ongoing.